powered by petrol, diesel, and the rest, or you're in a building powered by that as an alternative source of power, or your business is running on it. The point is, it's like our lifeblood. So let's start off today with that all-important conversation around the sector, both internationally and in Nigeria. There's been lots of movements in that sector, so let's help you make sense of it. We're joined, as you can see, by Professor Emeritus Energy Studies, Louisiana State University, and Executive Director, Emmanuel Ekpeba Foundation, Abuja. Professor Wumi Eledare joins us from Ilorin, Kwara State. And joining us from our Abuja studio is an economist and energy sector expert, Kelvin Emmanuel. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the program. Naturally, I'll start with Emeritus Professor. And I want to start from the international space. Brent crude tumbling below $60. Our own benchmark for a budget is $75, right? The price of petrol today is still 800 and something naira. So people are looking at this in different lights. First, we're not going to earn enough for our budget, but I'm hoping that the price of petrol would at least come down considerably. But when you look at the price of Brent right now, below $60, what are the things you see, Prof?
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, for us who was very dependent on revenue from oil, a low price is not good for meeting budget expectations. But I understand the short-term implication of that. I still expect the price of oil to adjust when we settle this tariff that is having great implication on the global economy. The price of oil will always fluctuate up and down, but another person's loss is someone else's gain. And that's why I'll continue to advocate that we begin to pay quite a lot of attention to the downstream and midstream component of the oil and gas industry. For many years, we've depended too much on revenue from the upstream, but it doesn't grow economy as fast as midstream and downstream investment can do. So I understand the short-term implication of the up and down, and the price has to go down when the demand for crude is going down, and then you have surplus. And that's why you saw OPEC recently decided to cut production by about 500,000 barrels a day in June to be able to make sure that the price of oil comes to the market clearing on the economy goes up again. GDP projection for the US is down by almost 2%. The GDP projection for China, because of this trade tariff situation, is projected to go down for about 4%. We just need to begin to think differently from the way we used to think. I saw a video just now where nearly 24 vehicles were going around with the president, and some of them almost knocked down. We need to begin to think about cutting waste and go back to what Obasanjo did. When the price of oil is above the budget, save. When the price of oil is down, then you can go to excess crude saving that you have. So we need to think in terms of cutting down waste, even as the global oil and gas business is highly uncertain and the global oil and gas economy is highly uncertain. Discipline, fiscal discipline becomes the ball of the game. Don't look at the external factors. Think about what you can do within to adjust yourself to the uncertainty, globally speaking. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Prof. Let me go to Mr. Emmanuel now. So Prof has talked about the downstream and midstream sectors, that's what we should also pay attention to. Perhaps you may want to speak to the implication of the tumbling of the price of crude, which is a normal thing, but we're hoping it wouldn't last for too long. But right here at home, right, there's been a lot of events at the NNPC Limited, Kaduna, or rather, Warri and Port Harcourt Refinery. Let's leave Kaduna out of it for now. The possible probes, the shake-ups, what has been happening really at the refinery. So it's a potpourri of issues, really. So I want to know which one sticks out for you as one we should pay attention to first, then we can talk about the other issues, Mr. Emmanuel.
Kayode, good morning. Thank you so much for having me, and good morning to Geoff. It's a privilege to be here, as always. First of all, I If you look at what happened on Saturday, there was an OPEC meeting that was scheduled for today. It was moved to Saturday, OPEC Plus, and they actually decided to raise production by about 411,000 barrels, and they are talking about, increasing output at a time when there is like a glut, because the tariff situation has created a diversion of demand for U.S. shale crude from China, 245% tariff, and China is now buying a lot of its crude feedstock from Canada. So the tariff is making it nearly impossible for Chinese buyers to take crude from the U.S. like they usually do, WTI and some other grades of crude oil in America. And that has created some kind of situation in the markets, in the OPEC and members in declaration of cooperation, and you can see price actually coming down. WTI traded at about $55 last night when the markets opened in Asia. And the Brent is trading at around $60 handle right now. WTI is anywhere around $57. The reason why this is worrying is because the budget benchmark, I remember earlier this year I mentioned that $75 as budget benchmark was unrealistic. I remember the president sent National Assembly $70. They, in their wisdom, raised the benchmark to $75. And they didn't have a cash waterfall model to look at and say, these are the geopolitical and macroeconomic realities, and this is where we expect crude oil price. They just wishfully raise the projection for crude oil price. And the implication of this is the Naira is so exposed to the price of crude oil. There is no part of NNPC that is owned by the Sovereign Wealth Fund, in the sense that there is no share of earnings that NNPC gets, less, when it leaves crude, less its Frontier Business Exploration Fund remittance and retained earnings, that actually goes as dividends when the company declares dividends to NSI. There is no structure the government has provided to collapse the excess crude accounts into the stabilization fund of the NSI to ensure that when there is volatility and fluctuation, as it happens globally, oil-producing nations typically depend on their stabilization fund to meet up with the shocks that comes into the revenue remittance to the government to fund this budget. So you can see that the deficit component in the budget, my estimate, is anywhere around 18%, right? The options available to the presidency is to pull back this budget and create a supplementary budget, review its expenditure, start implementation of the Refinery report to reduce the size of government. The size of government is unrealistic. Like, look at that cash flow model, review all the for sale agreements that NNPC has signed, that is encumbered this amount of crude oil that is available for revenues. In my estimate, you have about 447,000 barrels of crude oil that is currently committed as loans that NNPC has signed with buyers, international off-takers. And the reason why this is very tricky, this price is very tricky, Kayode, is because not only do you have these loans, you also have like a strike price in the future contracts that are structured for these financing arrangements. That strike price says that if the price of crude oil drops or triggers that strike price, like, they naturally should rely on what they call a debt service reserve account as an excess to service the fall below the strike price. And I'll tell you that my estimates on strike price is anywhere between 55 and 65 US dollars, which means that quite a number of those agreements on which this, FSAs has been signed has already been triggered. And that explains the reason why for the month of April, is 2 last weeks of April, and all through the months of May, you have 16 million barrels of crude oil that has actually been scheduled for lifting, but has not been lifted already. It's been allocated for lifting. The companies have signed agreements to take off, but it's actually not been, the ships have not been loaded, and the crude oil has not been taken out of Nigeria because the prices are encumbered. And this places the government in a fix on how it's going to finance its budget. Now, it's a good thing, Kayode, that this month of May, we're expecting that the tax bills will be signed and implementation will start 3 months after. And we're expecting that the GDP ratio is gradually going to start going up, but it will take some time. But we need to understand that crude oil and gas contributes about 80 to 90% of the FX that Nigeria gets for the CBN to do balance of payments and for revenues to be remitted to the government to fund its budget. Okay? So in my view, I think the Minister of Finance and the Central Bank Governor, they need to come back to Abuja, suspend international traveling for now, sit down and face the realities on the ground. Because if the fact that they didn't see this coming shows clearly that they didn't have a cash flow model and they didn't do an analysis of what might possibly be the implications if crude oil price drops. They didn't look at the map.
Yeah, let's take it to Prof. Prof, I want you to piggyback on some of the things Kelvin has alluded to. He's talked about the financing model, which basically sounds like there are no buffers for moments like this when there is a downscale in terms of the pricing of crude oil. So I would like you to speak to that, maybe your comment on that element of maybe poor planning as he's alluded to. But another part I would like you to speak to, which is a very serious concern. On one hand, the numbers are going down in terms of the prices of crude oil. On the other hand, our production hasn't really improved. I looked at the numbers from NUPROC, crude oil, not condensate, between January to the last published numbers, is an average of 1.4, 1.45, maximum 1.5, and we know the projection for the year about 2 million. What is responsible for that? And then add to that is to this back and forth over the state of our refinery, which I'd like you and Mr. Kelvin to speak to. We'll come to that. But those two issues first. Production capacity, improved production, and financing model that convolutes this entire thing that puts us in, quote unquote, this situation. Prof.
Well, thank you. And, those are key issues that we need to grapple with respect to the budgeting process. And so some of us, we've said this over the years. You cannot just be looking at price, which is highly uncertain, and you are looking at production, which also is not within your control. And then you are making that to be the purpose of your spending. And then when the price of oil goes up, you also go ahead and expand your spending. That has never worked, and we've always run into trouble with that. And that's why we need to go back to Obasanjo's model and stop misinterpreting the Constitution. We say that, oh, the Constitution says all the money that is made must be put in federation account and it must be shared. That is baloney. That's a misinterpretation of the Constitution. And budget is an estimate, and it has two components to it, your income and your expenditure. And when your income is not flowing, you must have the proper approach and cut your spending. So I think we need to go back and not just make wrong projection without what I call, you are dealing with a stochastic event. Oil production is stochastic. Price is stochastic. And you are taking a best estimate. And you have historical data. And this is where data analytic and proper training of your professionals becomes so important. And so that is the way to go when it comes to budgeting. I think Nigerian budgeting, it leaves much to be desired. And it doesn't seem as if we want to change. Going forward, looking at the global economic dynamics, Nigeria needs to be thinking in a way to change their mindset, including the population. The mindset of the population has to change. Some of us who are changing our mindset, adjusting to what comes our way that are beyond our control. That's what I'm going to say about budgeting. We need to change our mindset, and we need to begin to look at innovation, data analytics. You cannot have data and not use it before making your next plan. And that's why we need to go back to the planning commission that oversees every sector of the economy. We have become too political instead of looking at things from a professional angle. Now, when it comes to the next question that you answer with respect to production capacity, I have a different perception on this. You have a country with 37 billion barrels proved reserves. What that means is there's a 90% certainty looking at the current infrastructure in place that you can produce at least 0.03% of it, which is going to be about 1 billion barrels a day. And if you divide it by 365, that will bring you to about 2.7, 2.8 million barrels per day. The installed capacity is there. Why are we not doing it? Perhaps our maintenance culture leaves much to be desired. I remember 40-something years ago when I was in Shell, maintenance is critical. Every morning you will see the maintenance crew going from one location to the other. We don't do that anymore. And of course, we blame it on security. So that we don't have the reserve to produce 3 million barrels per day is a baloney. 37 million barrels per day can give you 3 million barrels per day. I mean, 37 billion barrels can give you 3 million barrels per day. Our mindset and leadership approach is what I think we need to rethink. The managerial capability is very key. And that's why I always cherish my days in Shell with management skills that are undebatable, not conjectural. Everybody knows what they are supposed to do. The reason why we are not producing at a rate, in my opinion, and I might be wrong, is our leadership mindset is too transactional instead of being transformational. Right. And I'll continue to preach that.
All right, Prof. Mr. Kelvin, let's bring it back to you. Maybe you can also add to what Prof has said in terms of what's affecting our production. I know that when Melekere was in charge, he had mentioned that 4,800 illegal pipeline connections were installed. As at that time, 300 insertions for every 100 kilometers. I just need to throw out the data as at then to tell you that this is, oil theft is an institution in itself. But one of the things I want you to speak to strongly is what is playing out with the refineries. I know you've spoken extensively about this, as to the functionality in that sense of the Port Harcourt and Warri Refinery. Recently, we heard there was an issue with the Warri Refinery. Some persons went there and said, for the gas to be flaring means the refinery is working, just some components are not working. But maybe you tell us publicly as to what is the state of those refineries? Because it looks like on one hand, upstream we're having issue, downstream we're also having issue, which perhaps informs the sacking of some of the management of the NNPCL, of the refineries in that sense.
Geoff, before I talk about the refinery, I want to talk about the issues upstream and, you know, what I think can be done to increase production. First of all, I'll say that the Nigerian government today does not have an accurate estimate of the amount of crude oil that comes to surface. I've said this severally, and I stand by it. And the reason is very simple. Nigeria is one of the only countries producing crude oil in the world where the government does not have a hydrocarbon accounting framework. In hydrocarbon accounting framework is what helps the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which are the vehicles, special purpose vehicles designated in the Petroleum Industry Act, to actually independently verify and confirm real time, you know, for, you know, aggregation, for transmission, and for allocation to JV partners, the amount of crude oil that comes to subsurface and what is due to the government. So for the share of ownership the government has that NNPC, you know, holds through either JV or independently, I'll say cumulatively it's around 51.4%. Okay? But there's discrepancy between what is due to the government based on the JV contracts that has been signed and the independent assets that are owned by NEPL, which is the E&P arm of NNPC, and what is actually lifted as reported by them in their balance sheet. There's a discrepancy. Okay? So, first of all, the government needs to build an hydrocarbon accounting framework. And that is not just a spreadsheet. It's not a spreadsheet you just build and say, oh, these are the numbers. No. For you to be successful with that framework, you need to follow Section 69 of the PIA, which is the surveyor needs to create a grid system, a GIS, for the onshore acreage in Nigeria. That GIS is the basis on which you meter wellheads, you place meters on the pipes, the aggregation pipes, the transmission pipes, okay? The placing of meters for checking of temperature and pressure as sensors will help you with vandalization. Okay? Today, Geoff, because of alternative crude oil evacuation routes, I'll tell you that operators spend anywhere between $12 and $15 to evacuate crude oil, just to evacuate from, where you get it, wellheads, to the flow meters, and then the terminals. So it costs them about $12 to $15. So if they are spending $12 to $15, it's adding to your unit cost production per barrel, which is the reason why unit cost production per barrel in Nigeria is anywhere between $32 and $45 a barrel. In North Africa, in the Middle East, unit cost production per barrel is anywhere between $8 and $20 a barrel. So why is it costing up to $45 a barrel of crude? Because you don't have the infrastructure to measure, and you don't have the SCADA system that will help the authorities to be able to manage vandalization of pipes. You don't have, like Prof said, a good maintenance culture for replacing old pipes, wearied pipes. Now, those are issues upstream.
Right.
Okay? Let's come to the refineries. $2.9 billion was allocated for turnaround maintenance. FEC letter was approved on the 12th of August, 2021. Okay? The first forward sale agreements that was structured to finance Port Harcourt turnaround maintenance was $1 billion with Afrexim. That was in December of 2021. Okay, another around $450 million was raised with a company that has a license to lift crude from Nigeria, where NNPC gives the company crude as payment for the cash that was given to it upfront to finance turnaround maintenance. The monies that was approved by FEC in 2021 is enough to build a brand new refinery. So if you look at all the refineries that are owned by the government from 1965, you have Old Port Harcourt, about 60,000 barrels, New Port Harcourt, 150,000. You have Warri, 125,000. You have Kaduna, 110,000. Kaduna has two CDUs, CDU1 and CDU2. CDU1 is, I think, 50,000. CDU2 is 60,000. One of the CDUs cannot take Nigerian crude. The pipeline leading to Kaduna is not in service. The pipeline leading to Warri from Escravos is not in service. Warri has a catalytic reforming unit, but Warri's catalytic reforming unit is not functional. So you can't actually refine PMS. You can produce naphtha, but you can't break it into higher distillates like PMS. The same thing in Port Harcourt. And NMDPRA data has shown very clearly, like I've said for months, that those refineries are not producing petrol. What they were doing was they badge C5 resins to the refinery, blend with naphtha condensates, and call it PMS.
In other words, you're saying it's just a matter of semantics. As far as you're concerned, those refineries are not doing what they ought to do in the refining sense. They're just doing some things on the side. But for you, they're still not doing the refining, the production as it ought to be, right?
Kayode, there's Aradel in River State, there is Walter Smith, there is DuPont Midstream, there's Obele, there's OPAC. Those are modular refineries, small refineries, 11,000, 5,000 here, 1,000 here, 2,500 here. They don't even have CRU. They don't have catalytic reforming units. The only refinery in Nigeria, and I stand by, and I've always said it, the only refinery in Nigeria producing PMS is Dangote.
All right.
Dangote is currently doing 44 million liters of PMS on a daily basis. NNPC is not refining PMS.
All right, so Mr. Manuel,
they are blending.
I need to touch on this. So would it be right then to expect the price of petrol to come down now that Brent is below $60? Because it said that really when you look at the whole cost, refining is about 15 to 20% of the cost. That crude is a major, cost when it comes to getting out petrol or refining, about 60% or more. So now that the 60% of that is coming down, shouldn't we be seeing petrol at 500 naira?
Okay, so let's do some numbers. The simple way to calculate the price of PMS S-gate at the refinery is basically you multiply the price of a metric ton of PMS, which has a global Platts pricing system, multiply it by your exchange rates, right? And no refinery around the world can determine the price of a metric ton of PMS. That price is fixed. So there is a problem here. If the price of crude oil is coming down and your exchange rate is dropping, then you have a problem. A good way to look at this would have been the price of crude oil is coming down, the dollar index is dropping, Naira is supposed to naturally appreciate. Why is Naira instead falling? Naira is instead falling is because the central bank does not have sufficient net external reserves to be able to supply liquidity to the market.
Okay, Mr. Manuel, pardon me to butt in now because of time.
The exchange rates.
I get your point. Because of time, I want Prof to also speak on that point. You have broken it down. But Prof, on a final note, your thoughts on this? Because the huge chunk of refining, which is crude, has come down. So where should we be expecting the price of petrol from your own calculation as well?
Well, I think I understand it's a technical conversation, but the market determines what the price will be. He's correct. The crude oil price accounts for nearly 70 to 80% of the price of petroleum products. But remember, you have a market structure in Nigeria that is more oligopoly with two dominant firms. So basically, they are going to be looking at each other in the way they price the petroleum product. I just want to plead with Nigerians. You cannot pick and choose. For a moment, you will say that the market doesn't work in Nigeria, and yet, when the market is favorable to you, you want it to work. No, basically, governance is key. And when you have two dominant firms, the market is anti-competitive, and you cannot see the reward of efficiency of the market without the regulators making sure that they are on the plate. Listen, the Port Harcourt Refinery, there is so much uncertainty, but people must understand that it's only the distillation unit that is currently functioning. And that's why they are not necessarily at full capacity. And it is only until December 2026 that they expect to get to that capacity. Nigerians must begin to realize that the market works, and you cannot disobey the market and not live the consequences. So I don't particularly, it's not good for Nigeria for the price of oil to be down from the budgetary point of view. But from the consumer's point of view, a lower price will make Dangote to go to around 800 naira per liter. And you don't want the price to go to $50 because it's going to have future implication. Because when the price is low, nobody's going to invest to find more reserves.
Right.
And it's going to catch up. That's why there must be balancing optimization strategy.
All right,
Let me talk to the refinery before we go. Key things, if this refinery is supposed to deliver the way we want, which Dangote is doing, is a maintenance culture.
All right.
Workforce training, and process optimization. And process optimization requires reducing the cost of operations and minimizing waste and enhancing productivity. There's work to do, but Nigerians need to be patient.
Well, instructive words there.
Yes, these refineries are not delivering. And we cannot just wake up and say, oh, they must deliver.
All right, Prof. Very instructive words.
We just have words.
I was just going to tell you.
Right, Prof. Mr. Emmanuel, we're totally out of time, but this is not the end. In fact, we're getting word that the support staff at Warri Refinery may just be protesting, shut down the whole facility. But this is a development story which we're following up on just to get a sense of what exactly is happening right there. But we have to thank you so much, Professor Emeritus, Energy Studies, Louisiana State University, Professor Wumi Ledari, thank you so much. Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel, economist and energy sector expert. We appreciate your time. This is not the end of a conversation, so don't be surprised if we're having you back today or tomorrow. This is an ongoing one. Thank you once again for your time.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick break now while we pay attention to what's happening at the Warri Refinery, but there are other issues to resolve, so stay with us. We'll be right back.